I still remember the feeling. That peculiar combination of confusion and humiliation washing over me as I sat across from Richard, our department head, and Melanie from HR. The conference room suddenly felt too small, the air conditioner too loud. "Eleanor, we've decided to restructure the project leadership team," Richard said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We feel your skills would be better utilized elsewhere in the organization." 3 years I had given to this team. 3 years of late nights, canceled weekend plans, and delivering results that exceeded expectations. Yet here I was, being told I wasn't leadership material. "We've observed that your approach tends to be more collaborative than directive," Melanie added, as if collaboration was suddenly a liability. "The team needs someone who can make swift, authoritative decisions." What they meant was that I wasn't loud enough. I wasn't the person who dominated meetings or interrupted colleagues to assert my point. I was the one who listened, who found the common threads in opposing viewpoints, who made space for the quieter voices in the room. "Of course," I said, maintaining my composure despite the tremor I felt in my hands. "I understand." But I didn't understand. Not really. Walking back to my desk that Wednesday afternoon, I felt the curious stares of my colleagues. News traveled fast at Helix Technologies. By tomorrow, everyone would know I had been demoted, or as Richard had so eloquently put it, strategically reassigned. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate, Diane. "Still on for dinner tonight?" I had completely forgotten about our plans. The thought of recounting my professional humiliation over pasta made my stomach turn. But I knew Diane wouldn't let me wallow alone in our apartment. "Wouldn't miss it," I typed back, mustering a cheerfulness I didn't feel. That evening at Marcello's, our favorite Italian restaurant, I picked at my fettuccine while Diane listened to my story with growing indignation. "They can't do that. You're the reason the Harrison account didn't walk last year," she insisted, gesturing emphatically with her fork. "And wasn't it your idea to revamp the client onboarding process? The one they're now using company-wide?" "Apparently that's not leadership," I said, taking a larger than necessary sip of my wine. "Leadership is apparently about being the loudest voice in the room." "That's such garbage," Diane said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "So what are you going to do?" It was the question I'd been avoiding all afternoon. What was I going to do? Accept my new role with diminished responsibilities? Look for another job? Fight the decision? I don't know, I admitted. I just know I'm not going to become someone I'm not to fit their narrow definition of leadership. Later that night, I sat on our small balcony overlooking the city lights. My laptop balanced on my knees as I updated my resume, a task I hadn't performed in years. The cursor blinked accusingly at me while I tried to summarize my professional value in bullet points and action verbs. My phone lit up with a notification. It was a LinkedIn message from Tyler, a junior account manager on my team. "Just heard the news. Wanted you to know that working with you has been the best professional experience I've had at Helix. If there's anything I can do, please let me know." I blinked back unexpected tears. Maybe I hadn't been the kind of leader Richard wanted, but I had made an impact where it mattered. As I returned to my resume, something shifted in my perspective. This wasn't the end of my story at Helix. It was just the beginning of a different one. One where I would prove that true leadership isn't about authority or volume. It's about impact. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I wanted to get settled at my new desk in the corner, a visible downgrade from my previous workspace, before the full contingent of curious onlookers arrived. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the empty office in a way that felt oddly hopeful. As I arranged my things, I made a decision. I wouldn't fight the demotion directly. That would only reinforce their perception of me as lacking assertiveness. Instead, I would let my work speak for itself. I would build something so undeniably valuable that they would be forced to recognize what real leadership looks like. By the time the office began filling up, I had already drafted a proposal for a mentorship program I'd been contemplating for months. If I couldn't lead the project team anymore, I would lead in a different way, by elevating others. I just didn't realize then how that decision would ultimately change everything. The first month after my demotion was exactly as uncomfortable as I had anticipated. The whispers when I entered the break room, the sudden silences when I approached groups of colleagues, the awkward encounters with my former team members, who didn't quite know how to act around me anymore. Morgan Fletcher had been appointed as my replacement, a choice that surprised no one. She was everything I wasn't in meetings, assertive to the point of aggression, quick to decide, and unwavering once her mind was made up. The leadership team adored her. Meanwhile, I had been reassigned to client research, essentially preparing reports that others would present. It was the kind of work typically given to new graduates, not someone with 8 years of industry experience. "Eleanor, do you have the Westfield analysis ready?" Morgan asked one morning, stopping by my desk without so much as a hello. "The client meeting got moved up to this afternoon. I sent it to you yesterday," I replied, keeping my tone professional despite the fact that this was the third time that week Morgan had asked for something I'd already delivered. "Right. I'll check my email again," she said, already walking away. I took a deep breath and returned to my screen, where I was putting the finishing touches on my mentorship program proposal. Over the past few weeks, I had refined the concept and gathered supporting data showing how similar initiatives had improved retention and innovation at other companies. That afternoon, I knocked on the door of Abigail Lawrence, our VP of Talent Development. I had strategically bypassed Richard, knowing he would likely dismiss the idea without proper consideration. "Eleanor, come in," Abigail said warmly. We had worked together on a few cross-departmental projects in the past, and I had always appreciated her straightforward approach. "What can I do for you?" I placed my proposal on her desk. "I've developed a framework for an internal mentorship program that I believe could address several of our retention challenges." Abigail raised an eyebrow but picked up the document. "Tell me more." For the next 20 minutes, I walked her through the concept. A structured program pairing junior staff with experienced team members across departments, focusing on skills development rather than just career advancement. What made it different from standard mentorship programs was the emphasis on reverse mentoring as well, creating spaces where senior staff could learn from the fresh perspectives of newer employees. When I finished, Abigail leaned back in her chair, studying me with newfound interest. "This is remarkably thorough, Eleanor. And the timing is excellent. We just received the quarterly satisfaction surveys, and career development was cited as a top concern." She tapped my proposal. "Would you be willing to lead this initiative?" It was the opening I had been waiting for. That's exactly what I was hoping for. 2 weeks later, the Helix Mentorship Initiative was officially launched. I had been granted a modest budget and, more importantly, the authority to implement the program as I saw fit. The announcement went out company-wide, and I braced myself for limited interest. After all, I wasn't exactly positioned as an organizational leader anymore. But by the end of the day, my inbox was flooded with responses. 27 employees had volunteered to be mentors. 35 had applied to be mentees. Among them were several surprising names, including Tyler and 2 other members of my former team. The most unexpected email came from Zoe Davis, a senior developer known for her brilliance and her reluctance to engage in anything that resembled corporate politics. "I've avoided these kinds of programs in the past," she wrote, "but your approach seems different. Count me in as a mentor if you'll have me." That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table sorting applications into potential pairings, Diane peered over my shoulder. "Look at you, building your own empire in the shadows," she teased, sliding a cup of tea beside my laptop. I laughed. "Hardly an empire, just trying to create something meaningful." "From what you've told me, meaningful is exactly what was missing from their definition of leadership," she pointed out. "So this is kind of perfect." The first mentorship meetup was scheduled for the following Wednesday after work. I had reserved the largest conference room and arranged for catering, wanting to set the right tone from the start. As people began to arrive, I felt a flutter of nerves. This was the first real test of whether my vision could translate into reality. I had designed the initial session as a structured mixer, with activities designed to help potential mentors and mentees identify meaningful connections beyond just job titles and departments. The room buzzed with conversation as people engaged with the exercises, moving between groups with an enthusiasm I hadn't dared hope for. "This is not what I expected," a voice said beside me. I turned to find Richard observing the proceedings. a puzzled expression on his face. I hadn't seen his name on the participant list. "What did you expect?" I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. "The usual corporate exercise in futility. People paired up based on org charts, having awkward coffee meetings until they quietly abandoned the whole thing." He gestured to the energetic room. "This feels different." I bit back the urge to point out that this was precisely the kind of leadership he had claimed I lacked. Instead, I simply said, "That was the goal." As the weeks passed, the mentorship program took on a life of its own. The pairs met regularly, but they also formed a community, sharing resources and supporting each other's projects. I created a digital hub where participants could document their experiences and learnings, which quickly became a valuable knowledge repository. The first tangible results came faster than I anticipated. Zoe and her mentee, a recent hire named Patrick, collaborated on a solution to a persistent software issue that had been plaguing the product team for months. Two other pairs identified a significant inefficiency in our client communication process and proposed a streamlined alternative. 3 months into the program, Abigail called me into her office. "The executive team has taken notice of what you're building," she said. "The mentorship pairs have generated more actionable innovations in the last quarter than our official innovation lab." I felt a surge of vindication, but kept my expression neutral. The participants deserve the credit. I just created the framework. "And that, Eleanor, is precisely why it's working," Abigail replied with a knowing smile. "You've created a system that brings out the best in people without making it about yourself." As I walked back to my desk, I passed the project team's area. Morgan was standing at a whiteboard, her voice raised as she critiqued someone's work. The team members sat silent, their faces a mixture of resignation and frustration. I thought about how differently things might have unfolded if I had still been leading that team. But for the first time since my demotion, I realized I didn't want to go back. I was building something far more significant, a model of leadership that created leaders rather than followers. What I didn't know then was that the real test of this model was just around the corner, and it would come from the most unexpected direction. 6 months after my demotion, Helix Technologies faced its first major crisis in years. Our flagship product experienced a catastrophic failure during a client's critical end-of-quarter processing, resulting in data corruption that took 3 days to resolve. The client was furious, threatening not only to terminate their contract, but to publicly share their experience. The tension in the office was palpable as Richard called an all-hands emergency meeting. Standing at the front of the room, he looked more haggard than I'd ever seen him. "We need solutions, not excuses," he announced, scanning the room. "Morgan will lead a task force to determine what went wrong and how we prevent it from happening again. We need to deliver a comprehensive plan to the client by Friday." Morgan stepped forward, already listing off the people she wanted on her team. My name, unsurprisingly, wasn't mentioned. As the meeting dispersed, I returned to my desk, troubled by what I had observed. The failure had clearly originated in the integration between two system components, an area where I had previously documented concerns. Before my demotion, I had advocated for a more robust testing protocol, but the suggestion had been dismissed as too time-consuming. I was contemplating whether to resurrect that documentation when Tyler appeared at my desk. "Eleanor, we need your help," he said in a low voice. "The task force is heading in the wrong direction." "What do you mean?" "Morgan is convinced this is a training issue, that the implementation team didn't follow protocols. But Zoe and I think the problem is more fundamental. It's in the architecture itself." I frowned. "Have you shared your concerns?" Tyler's expression was answer enough. "You know how those meetings go. It's Morgan's way or no way." That evening, several members of my mentorship program gathered in a conference room after hours. They hadn't explicitly invited me, but Tyler had mentioned where they would be, a clear signal that my presence would be welcome. When I walked in, I found 6 people huddled around a whiteboard, including Zoe, Tyler, and Patrick. They were mapping out the system architecture, highlighting the points of failure. "Eleanor, perfect timing," Zoe said. "We've been trying to pinpoint the exact sequence that led to the data corruption. For the next 3 hours, we deconstructed what had happened. piecing together the cascade of events from multiple perspectives. It became increasingly clear that the issue wasn't a simple implementation error, but a fundamental flaw in how two key components interacted under specific conditions. This is going to require a significant redesign of the integration layer, Patrick said, rubbing his tired eyes. Not something we can patch with a quick fix. Which is exactly what Morgan is proposing, Tyler added. I studied the whiteboard, mentally calculating the work involved. We need to document this thoroughly. All the evidence, all the potential solutions, with clear timelines and resource requirements. And then what? Zoe asked. Morgan's not going to change course based on our analysis. You know how she operates. I considered our options. Going around Morgan would be seen as undermining her authority, the very thing I had been accused of failing to demonstrate. But allowing a flawed solution to be implemented would be a disservice to both the client and the company. We prepare 2 documents, I finally said. One with the comprehensive redesign that we know is needed. The other outlining how to make Morgan's approach as robust as possible within its limitations. And if she rejects both? Tyler asked. Then we'll have done our professional duty, I replied. Sometimes leadership is about having the courage to present uncomfortable truths, even when they might not be welcomed. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Morgan. To her credit, she agreed to see me during her lunch break. I understand you and your team have been working on an alternative analysis of the system failure, she said as I sat down across from her. News traveled fast, especially when after-hours meetings were involved. We have some insights that might be valuable to your task force, I said, keeping my tone collaborative rather than confrontational. I handed her our carefully prepared document. This represents the collective thinking of several team members who have hands-on experience with the affected systems. Morgan leafed through the pages, her expression guarded. This contradicts several of our working theories. It does, I acknowledged. And we've included a second approach that aligns more closely with the direction your task force is heading, with some additional safeguards we believe would strengthen that solution. She looked up at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. Why are you doing this, Eleanor? Trying to swoop in and save the day? The accusation stung, but I had anticipated it. I'm doing this because getting the right solution matters more than who gets credit for it. The client deserves our best thinking, regardless of where it comes from. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of respect in her expression. Then she closed the document. I'll review this with the team. I left her office uncertain whether our work would make any difference. But that afternoon, I received a calendar invitation to the task force's next meeting, as did Zoe and Tyler. The meeting was tense but productive. Morgan had clearly reviewed our analysis thoroughly and had pointed questions about our proposed redesign. We answered honestly, acknowledging the complexities and risks involved. By the end of the session, a hybrid approach had been outlined, one that addressed the fundamental architectural issues while incorporating elements of Morgan's original plan. I'll present this to Richard tomorrow, Morgan said as we wrapped up. Eleanor, I'd like you to join that meeting. It was a small olive branch, but a significant one. The presentation to Richard went better than expected. He was initially resistant to the idea of a substantial redesign, concerned about the time and resources required, but the evidence we had gathered was compelling, and eventually he conceded that a more fundamental solution was necessary. The client won't be happy about the timeline, he warned. They'll be less happy about another failure, I pointed out. If we explain our process and the thoroughness of our solution, I believe they'll understand the value. Richard gave me a long look. You want to be part of the client presentation? I think it would be helpful to have someone who can speak to the technical details, I said carefully. To my surprise, he nodded. Work with Morgan to prepare your talking points. The client meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. In the days leading up to it, I noticed a subtle shift in the office dynamics. The invisible barrier that had existed between me and my former team began to dissolve as we collaborated on the presentation. Even Richard seemed more receptive to my input. On the morning of the client meeting, I arrived at the office to find an email from Abigail. Whatever happens today, remember that you've already demonstrated what real leadership looks like. The mentorship program participants can't stop talking about how you've changed their experience at Helix. Her words steadied me as we entered the client's imposing headquarters. The meeting would be the true test of whether our solution, and our approach to presenting it, would save the relationship. As we settled around the conference table facing the client's executive team, I realized that this moment represented far more than a technical discussion. It was about trust, accountability, and the courage to acknowledge mistakes while committing to meaningful change. The next 2 hours would determine not just the fate of a significant contract, but also validate or disprove everything I believed about what it meant to be a leader. The client meeting lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. By the end, my throat was dry from explaining technical details, and my hand cramped from taking notes on their questions and concerns. But we had done it, convinced them to give Helix another chance, contingent on successful implementation of our redesigned solution. Your transparency about both the problem and the complexity of fixing it properly made the difference, their CTO told us as we wrapped up. We appreciate that you didn't try to minimize the issue or offer a quick fix that would leave us vulnerable again. As we gathered our materials to leave, he addressed me directly. Ms. Reynolds, your technical explanation was exceptionally clear. It's rare to find someone who can translate complex architectural concepts into business implications so effectively. I thanked him, acutely aware of Richard watching this exchange with an unreadable expression. The ride back to the office was quiet, all of us processing the meeting in our own ways. Morgan broke the silence as we neared Helix. That went better than I expected, she admitted. Your approach to the presentation worked. Coming from Morgan, this was high praise indeed. It was a team effort, I replied. Your handling of their contract concerns was crucial. Richard, who had been silent until then, spoke up. We have a lot of work ahead to deliver on what we promised. Morgan, I want you to continue leading the technical implementation. Eleanor, I'd like you to be the client liaison for this project. Your ability to communicate the complexities clearly will be valuable as we progress. It wasn't a restoration of my previous role, but it was a meaningful acknowledgement of my contributions. I'd be happy to, I said. In the weeks that followed, our team worked tirelessly on the redesign. The mentorship program continued to flourish in parallel, with several participants directly involved in the client project. The boundaries between formal team structures began to blur as people collaborated based on expertise rather than reporting lines. 2 months into the implementation, with the project progressing well ahead of schedule, Richard called me into his office. Abigail was there too, which immediately piqued my curiosity. Eleanor, we want to discuss the future of the mentorship program, Richard began. Its impact has exceeded our expectations. Abigail smiled. The quarterly engagement scores showed a significant increase in departments with high participation in your program. And the innovation metrics are impressive. 17 implemented improvements traced directly to mentorship pairs. We'd like to formalize the program as a permanent part of our organizational development strategy, Richard continued. With expanded resources and a dedicated team, we want you to lead it. I blinked, surprised by the offer. As a side responsibility? No, Richard said. As your primary role. We're creating a new position, Director of Collaborative Innovation. The mentorship program would be your flagship initiative, but you'd also be responsible for developing other structures that foster the kind of cross-functional problem-solving we've seen emerge. It was more than a restoration of my previous status. It was an elevation, a creation of a new kind of leadership role tailored to the strengths they had once dismissed. I'll need autonomy to implement these programs as I see fit, I said, finding my voice. And direct reporting lines to both of you. Richard looked momentarily taken aback by my assertiveness, but Abigail nodded approvingly. We wouldn't offer the role any other way, she said. Your judgment on these matters has been vindicated. 3 days later, the announcement went out company-wide. The congratulatory messages poured in, but the one that meant the most came from Tyler. This is what real leadership recognition looks like. Thank you for showing us all a different path. The transition to my new role happened quickly. I was given a team of 3 to help manage the expanded mentorship program and develop new initiatives. Morgan and I established a working relationship based on mutual respect for our different strengths. The client project was completed successfully, ahead of schedule and with enhanced functionality beyond what we had initially promised. 1 year after my demotion, I found myself in a position I couldn't have imagined during those dark days, leading an entirely new function within the company, one that embodied my vision of what leadership could and should be. It was a Tuesday morning when my LinkedIn notifications began exploding. Confused, I opened the app to find that Morgan had written a post that was rapidly gaining traction. Today, I want to recognize Eleanor Reynolds, who taught me what real leadership looks like. A year ago, I replaced her as team lead, believing leadership was about authority and decisive action. I was wrong. Eleanor showed that true leadership is about elevating others, fostering collaboration, and having the courage to present difficult truths. She's now the person I turn to most for professional guidance. Leadership lessons. Professional growth. The post had dozens of comments, many from Helix employees sharing their own experiences of working with me. Even Richard had commented, acknowledging that the company had evolved its understanding of leadership partly due to my influence. Later that day, I received an unexpected email from a former team member who had left Helix shortly after my demotion. She was now a senior manager at a competing firm. I'm reaching out because we're looking to build a similar collaborative innovation function here. Would you be open to a conversation? Also, I've been listing you as my top reference on LinkedIn. Hope that's okay. I smiled at the irony. The person whose leadership qualities had once been questioned was now being sought out as a leadership reference and model. That evening, I met Diane for our traditional Tuesday dinner at Marcello's, the same restaurant where I had picked at my pasta and contemplated my uncertain future a year before. To full circles, Diane said, raising her glass, and proving them wrong in the best possible way. I clinked my glass against hers. Not just proving them wrong, I corrected, showing them a better alternative. As we enjoyed our meal, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The demotion that had felt like an ending had actually been the beginning of something far more meaningful. By staying true to my values and vision of leadership, I hadn't just reclaimed my professional standing, I had transformed it into something more authentic and impactful. The company that had once kicked me off a team for lacking leadership qualities now pointed to me as an exemplar of a new leadership model. The colleagues who had once whispered about my demotion now sought my mentorship, and the people who had questioned my abilities now listed me as their top professional reference. Sometimes, I realized, the best response to rejection isn't to change yourself to fit someone else's limited definition of success. It's to redefine success entirely, creating a path that allows your unique strengths to become undeniably valuable. After all, true leadership isn't about position or authority. It's about impact. And sometimes, the greatest impact comes from the places and the people you least expect.